as we just saw there in that report. Not only are families being destroyed and torn apart, but they're starving as well. The World Food Program says 500,000 people could be on the verge of famine, and the aid being allowed in is absolutely only a drop in the bucket. Still, despite the growing international outrage, Israel is showing little sign of pulling back. An Israeli military official telling CNN they do plan to occupy 75% of Gaza within the next 2 months. Meantime, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is urging Hamas to accept a new ceasefire hostage deal. For more on all of this, human rights lawyer and former peace negotiator Diana Buttu joins us now from Doha, and I welcome you to the program. The news from Gaza remains just so difficult. This war, 19 months old, no end in sight. You know, I was so struck by what you wrote last year about this in the Globe and Mail newspaper, that you lost faith in international law. I'm going to quote you here now saying, while Israel has made a mockery of international law, the global community continues to stand by idly, evidently unwilling to stop Israel. In short, international law has no meaning, not to Israel, which systemically violates it without consequence, nor to Palestinians, who have never been protected by it. Since you wrote those words, in your view, what has changed in your perspective, if anything?
Well, it's only actually gotten worse. Since I wrote those words, we've now had a few things happen. The first is that there have been 2 indictments by the International Criminal Court of Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, and yet nobody has actually arrested either of these 2 individuals. And yet, while the policy of starvation has been very openly stated by the current Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, as well as other members of the cabinet, we still don't see any indictments or any arrests of those individuals either. And at the same time, while there is growing condemnation around the world of what Israel's doing, that's it. It's just condemnation. Nobody seems to be acting. So the weapons flow is continuing. Nobody's boycotting Israel. There aren't any sanctions that have been placed on Israel. And for everyday Israelis, their life continues as normal. And so faced with this, I'm looking at a situation in which international law, while it has all of these wonderful attributes, actually in implementation means absolutely nothing, because it can't protect the most vulnerable people around the world, and that is stateless, defenseless, especially children in Gaza.
Yeah, and I take your point about certainly the defenseless and vulnerable in Gaza, but I don't think Israeli citizens, their lives have continued as normal either. And I will talk about that in a moment. But I want to get to Israel's Gideon's Chariots. That's what they're calling this operation, now aiming to control 75% of Gaza, squeezing 2 million, more than 2 million Palestinians into just 3 areas. You know, we just saw in that report, right? One strike killed 9 children within a single family. Israel says it's increasing pressure to force Hamas to release hostages. I mean, how do you interpret the true goals of this military campaign in Gaza, despite the fact that the United States says that there's a peace deal on the table?
Well, the Israelis made it clear, and in particular, Prime Minister Netanyahu made it clear from the very beginning what he wanted to do. And he said that he's going to make the Gaza Strip smaller in size and thinner in population. These were the words that he uttered in the very first week. And so we've seen that this is exactly what Israel has done. They've made it smaller in size and thinner in population. And so what we've seen is that a place that was already the most densely populated place on earth is now turning into that much smaller, because Israel has declared so much of the Gaza Strip now no-go zones. Much of the areas, for example, last year when President Biden said no entering Rafah, Netanyahu made a mockery of it and has completely flattened Rafah. So we know what the goals are. The goals are to ethnically cleanse Gaza. He's already said that he will only implement an agreement in which Palestinians leave the Gaza Strip, not remain there. And he's made it smaller in size and thinner in population. Those are his goals.
And given those goals, I wonder what you make now of what is a dire and urgent situation within Gaza. Humanitarian aid CEO, it was Jake Wood. He was the head of the U.S. and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. He resigned after just a couple months. You know, he said the operation couldn't uphold core humanitarian principles like neutrality and independence. what alternatives do you believe exist? Because as much as you and I continue this back and forth, people are starving and dying at this hour in Gaza.
People are starving and they're dying. And this is precisely why it should not be Israel, the country that has said that it intends to starve and kill people. They should not be the ones in control. This is why there needs to be international pressure to open up the crossing points to make sure that Palestinians get the food, the aid, the medicine, everything that they need, rather than making it that Israel has the ability to continue to control it. This is why we've seen such international condemnation, because when you see that what Israel's end goal is, which is to starve the population, to carry out genocide, you have to ask yourself, why are we continuing to let Israel do this? So the result is clear. What needs to be done is clear. The border crossings need to be opened. Palestinians need to be able to get food, water, fuel, medicine, to be able to rebuild. And that can't be in Israel's hands any longer. It can't be under Israel's control. It's been proven that all that it intends to do is just squeeze and squeeze and squeeze.
You know, given Israel here, they deny that it's genocide, and they say that they want their hostages back. In terms of that hostage deal, U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff urged Hamas today, just now, to accept a ceasefire deal that he claims is on the table. Still, the two sides remain very far apart. I don't have to remind you of that. What is the basis of any deal here? And do you believe that there is a chance that Israel's actions are just trying to bring Hamas to the table at this point?
Look, I think there is the option, there is the possibility, and I think that it's important to keep in mind that there was a deal that was signed back in January of this year, and it was Israel who unilaterally decided that it was going to continue on with its bombing campaign. Hamas actually did implement phase one of the agreement. It was Israel that unilaterally decided to bomb Gaza, and that's where we are today. Plus, Israel also decided even before the end of the six-week phase that it was going to cut off all supplies to Gaza. So there is the possibility there. And it's also important to keep in mind that Hamas from the very beginning said that they would give back the Israelis in exchange for an end to the war and in exchange for finally releasing Palestinians, 11,000 of them who've been held in Israeli prisons and starved for all of this period of time. Is it possible? Yes, but it requires international involvement, and we can't just be looking at short term. We have to be looking at long term as well. This isn't just a question of a ceasefire, but of finally letting Palestinians live in freedom and finally ending this Israeli military rule. It is possible, but it requires the will of the international community, and in particular requires the will of the United States, because it's the U.S. that has been providing this weaponry. It's the U.S. that has been providing this diplomatic support. Do I think it's possible? Yes, but it does require sustained international pressure. And unfortunately, I just have not seen that over the past 20 months.
And I hear you on the international pressure. And of course, we've discussed that quite a bit. I do want to ask you about reaching to Israeli allies, though, as well. The Israeli electorate, is a new poll by Channel 12, found that a majority of Israelis, 55% believe Netanyahu is more interested in staying in power than in winning the war or securing the release of the hostages. And over half attribute the lack of a new hostage deal to political reasons rather than legitimate security concerns. I'm wondering, Diana, how do you interpret this growing public skepticism towards Netanyahu's leadership? And do you believe it could have an impact? Again, I talk about reaching to Israeli allies because we've seen it again and again, even in those victimized by Hamas, that Israeli allies are there. They exist.
You know, it's important to look at what these polls are actually telling us. The polls are saying that they're opposed to Netanyahu and that they're opposed to the war. But at the same time, they're not saying that they're opposed to what Israel is doing. And I think that we have to really get to the root of this. And by getting to the root of this, it's important to keep in mind that there's been such a policy of dehumanization, so much so that Israeli politicians are allowed to say anything, including that Gaza should burn, that people should be starved. And there are no repercussions within the system. And so I think that if moving forward, Israelis have to get the message that what they're doing in Gaza is not good for Palestinians, that isn't just about them and their soldiers and so on, but that there is a global standard that is being broken and that they're the ones who are doing the breaking. I think that it's possible. But again, it requires that Israelis actually look deep inside and recognize what they've been doing over the course of the past 20 months, and they're just not there yet.
And I only have about a minute left, but I wonder what could compel Israel to do anything. There has been more international pressure. I know you say it's not enough, but, the EU certainly is speaking quite forcefully right now about what it may do. Is there a tipping point here on the pressure against Israel at all? Do you feel it?
Yes, I do. I think that if these words are met with actions, everything like cutting off trade agreements or imposing sanctions or not allowing Israelis to travel, where there's a tie, there's a connection between what Israel's doing in Gaza and between ordinary Israelis, I do think that there will be a change. As it stands right now, we know that Israelis have lost confidence in this government. The vast majority, as you've already said, have lost confidence in this government, but they themselves are not paying the price that needs to be paid in order for there to be a sea change. Yes, the words are important, but it needs to be backed by deeds as well.